A new poll done by the Daily Mail is raising some eyebrows after 20% of those surveyed under the age of 30 said they have a positive view of Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, this is what we were talking about right before the break. Even the oldest in that age group were barely in third grade during the 9/11 attacks. But the shift in the terror leader's popularity appears to have come from TikTok.
This is my favorite part of the show because we get to have our panelists say things
And
that we
have them weigh
can't.
in.
Let's bring in Dr. Lauren Wright, Joel Rubin, and Chris Hahn to talk about these things, because I want to jump in there right away with the bin Laden poll. You all read the poll. You saw these numbers. Marky and I were talking about it. And Joel, I'm just going to start with you. I have to believe a lot of this has to do with those of us who are a bit older failing to pass on the message of the damage that Osama bin Laden did on 9/11.
Yeah, Nick, look, that was one of the darkest days in American history, certainly the darkest in my lifetime. I was here in Washington, just outside the Pentagon, giving a speech when we heard the plane crash into the Pentagon. This was a horrific attack against civilians, against innocent Americans, and it was unprovoked. And, you know, I can't help but think that a lot of it is driven by this bizarre idea that somehow killing people is resistance, killing people through acts of terror is somehow showing strength. And what it is, in fact, is just undermining and harming innocent people, period. And let's remember as well, you know, Osama bin Laden, he had a track record of murder across Africa as well as in Afghanistan. So we are failing to educate. Kind of, I don't want to say that TikTok makes people dumber, but TikTok makes people dumber.
Yeah, no, I think all of us would probably echo your sentiments there. The other nugget I wanted to pull from this survey, it found that 3 in 10 Gen Z voters believe the views of the anti-Semitic terrorist leader who slaughtered thousands of innocent people in Israel on October 7th was a force for good. You know, Chris, I'll kick it over to you now. It's frightening to see these viewpoints, the comments being so widely spread and infiltrating these young minds. How disturbed by this were you? And as we mentioned, most of these people weren't even alive when the 9/11 terror attacks took place.
Yeah, you know, I like Joel, was working in government. I was working for Senator Schumer at the time of 9/11, and it seems like yesterday to me. It was one of the worst days of my life and of this nation's life. I am disturbed, but I'm also of the mind that most of the people who are answering these questions this way have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They're not paying proper attention to the pollster or the question. And I think this is an outlier. And I think with a little bit of education, they would have a very different view of Osama bin Laden and his views. You know, that gives me hope. But yeah, I think we are doing a bad job, I agree with Joel, of educating the generations that have come after us of what he was about and what happened on 9/11. I think if you took this poll just in New York or the areas around New York, you'd have a very different number, because here in this area, 9/11 is still very much talked about. Everybody knows somebody who was impacted by it. And every year, we never forget what happened that day. And I think the rest of the country needs to do that as well, so that we don't have these kind of numbers showing up in polls.
And Lauren, so many of these people are your students or that age group. When you saw students actually read that letter from Osama bin Laden saying, "Oh, wow, I've had an epiphany. I now understand." Lauren, how frustrating was it for you? Or how do you have that nuanced conversation and educate students who are curious to learn?
Well, young progressive voters, 18 to 29-year-olds, have these sorts of views more than any other group, and it absolutely terrifies me. We have very similar data, even scarier, if you will, on Holocaust denial among this group. 1 in 10 don't believe the Holocaust happened. 25% think it was the fault of the Jews. And the majority of them don't know basic facts about the Holocaust. And so, you know, analysts read these polls, they say it's terrifying. I think it's important to have the next step of the conversation. Why is it terrifying? It's terrifying because this is the sort of propaganda on TikTok today that we saw before the Holocaust. And people don't know about it. They're apathetic about it at best. They are sympathetic toward these views at worst. And TikTok is a medium where there's no counter argument. You know, if these views had a situation where they stood up to basic intellectual scrutiny, they would completely falter. But those are not the debates we have. Many of the ideas come from our college campuses, and we're part of the problem that has created this in the first place, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know one of the founding partners of JL Partners who conducted the poll said, quote, "It's hard to avoid the conclusion that there's a cancer in the American body politic," which is a small but sizable group of its youngest voters. So terribly frightening, as we look ahead to the future for some of these young minds. But we'll follow that closely. Let's go on to topic number 2 today. We now have Democratic mayors who are continuing to ask for federal help as migrants continue to get bused from Texas to big northern cities. Take a quick listen and we'll talk on the other side.
The governor of Texas needs to take a look in the mirror of the chaos that he is causing for this country.
There's no federal support, there's no coordinated entry, there's no work authorization. And I think cities would have to look at dramatically reducing the amount of services we offered or dramatically cutting our city budgets.
We cannot allow buses with people needing our help to arrive without warning at any hour of day and night.
So among the things they're demanding is just a simple heads up when buses come in and have designated drop-off sites and times. Joel, I'll go back to you. That's not too much to ask, right? I mean, I feel like a lot of people, even those probably on board with busing migrants to larger sanctuary cities, would think that just a heads up would be appropriate. I don't know. Am I missing something here?
Yeah, well, Marky, that's because you're assuming there's a good faith intent here by Governor Abbott, as if he's somehow trying to spread out the challenge of absorbing migrants coming across the border. But he's not. What he's doing is overtly political. It's intended to create chaos. It is anti-humanitarian at its core. It's a forced transfer of people who are being bused around a country they did not choose to be sent to in these locations. They are coming over for many different needs. There are practical solutions related to border security, related to additional international aid to countries so that less people come, related to ensuring that we are tracking people when they come here and pathways to citizenship. But that's not what Governor Abbott is calling for. He's calling for headlines. He's grandstanding. He's interested in hurting people, and he's really, frankly, interested in hurting Democrats.
Joel, quickly, I totally hear what you're saying there, but Chris and Lauren, I want to get you all in here because we do have some other things we want to get to. Chris, you're in D.C. You've seen these buses come to town. All of a sudden, this is a topic of conversation. So, like it or not, we can definitely agree that Governor Abbott has put this on everyone's radar.
Yeah, I agree with everything Joel said, but I would add politically, this stunt has been effective, right? We're all talking about it still. You've got Democratic mayors across the country complaining about it vocally to the White House. Look, Congress and the president need to solve the border crisis. It should not be the governor of Texas making immigration decisions for the rest of the country. There was a great bill in 2013 that would have alleviated some of these problems, would have given opportunities for people coming to this country to work, would have provided more border security. But the Republicans in the House of Representatives decided not to take that bill up after it passed by wide margins in the United States Senate. And until Congress acts, we're going to continue to have these problems. But in the short term, something needs to be done to allow migrants coming to this country, same way our families all came to this country, to have an opportunity to work and contribute to our economy. We have 11 million open positions in this country. I think a lot of those migrants would be very happy to take some of those jobs. So let's figure out a way to get that done.
Yeah, Lauren, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Chris on the congressional obstruction, but I think there's plenty to go around on the Democratic side, too. Republicans have posed some common sense border solutions. But look, it's not just asking the buses not to come that these Democratic mayors are doing. They're taking much larger steps. The Adams administration, for instance, is trying to dismantle a 40-year-old right to shelter law. That's a big deal. That was previously something Democrats were very proud of. And so it really is a situation where they have sanctuary cities. We've had this message of we have open arms for you. And there is a political reversal on that.
Dr. Lauren Wright, Joel Rubin, and Chris Hahn, thank you all so much for joining us today.